Welcome everybody to episode 59 of the Corner Blue. I'm Andres Rico. I'm here with Hugo Alvarado, and we're here basically in the aftermath of Gold Cup 2023, taking a few days to process things, digest things, ruminate about the results, and let some of that toxicity and anger just kind of like evaporate the last couple of days. How have you been, Uwe? How have you processed everything?
I let's just say that I kind of stayed away from social media for a couple of days,
I
and
probably should have done that.
so far it's been a pretty I would say it's been a pretty that combined with Elon Musk's experiment of limiting the amount of tweets that you can see per day. I think it really helped me because I couldn't see, like, there was a whole day after that game that the tweets wouldn't load. So that, in combination with me purposely staying away from social media, it helped me process a little bit faster. Because one of the things I find difficult is the release of toxicity that people do after we have negative results.
Nah, for sure. I think I should have done something similar because I guess in a way it's nice to process collectively or with others, at the same time, via social media and whatnot. But at the same time, too, once that ball gets rolling of everyone commiserating, sometimes it can help and you move on, or sometimes it can just build up a little more tension. And I'd say overall people seem to be pretty down and out on this performance. And I mean, it makes sense when you think about, the first Gold Cup under Hugo Perez and how that team looked right off the bat against Guatemala, then how they played against Mexico, and the fact that they got through, and how they played against Qatar, and how they would not give up despite some of the mistakes that have been kind of a motif, I guess you could say, throughout the last couple of years. But more than anything, let's break down the results briefly, and then we can kind of break down and analyze what the situation is, or at least give our take on what it is. So we go through the camp in Asia, right? They get 5 days before the beginning of the tournament. They're the last team to arrive to the United States and prep for the tournament. And we see a very lackluster result against Martinica, something that I don't think, maybe the naysayers were, but I don't think anyone that had a horse in this race would have been able to foresee. And that's the 2-1 loss to Martinica, something that set the tone for the tournament and ultimately was the nail in the coffin on this team right off the bat. Hugo, what are some of your sensations from that game briefly?
Yeah. I almost want to say an accidental match. But I do think that there was a factor of fatigue in the team, because the team did look a little slow, a little heavy. So I think, I mean, just to keep it very, very brief, we made two mistakes that cost us the 3 points. But other than that, I wouldn't say that Martinica controlled the game. I think we controlled the game. I think we created opportunities. We missed some opportunities. And at the end of the day, you need goals to win games, and we couldn't score the opportunities that we had, and Martinica did. They killed us with their strength, their speed, very precise counterattacks, or not counterattacks, took advantage of our mistakes, our giving the ball away, and they just took advantage of those possibilities, and we just couldn't, despite the efforts and the opportunities that we created, we just couldn't. We missed the penalty kick, so it was just, a very Yeah, I mean, very accidental match. I mean, that's the best way I can put it. And obviously, I think everybody knows that's the match that cost us the quarterfinals.
Definitely. I just recently watched an interview online off of Pulso Sports, so shout out to them. They interviewed along with the other press, um, Alex Roldan, now that he's back in Seattle with his club. And he mentioned at one point that there's a lack of cohesion on this team, or at times on this team, and that's what they're working for, is cohesion. And I think this match in particular showed what happens when El Salvador goes out there and they're lacking in that department. You know, versus Korea, we saw a very cohesive team. We saw a team that defended itself tightly, and then tried to exploit some counters or touching in the middle, and then, you know, trying to go down the lanes and then feed Brian Hin. Versus Martinica, it seemed like everyone in the attacking third or in the midfield was kind of playing for themselves. I remember at one point, you know, just n- no connection on passes, or if people would get the ball on the wings, whether it was Jairo or Kevin Reyes, they just kind of like run in a straight line. We saw flashes of Machito Menjivar getting the ball and trying to drive towards the middle and create space. But as you said, the team overall looked slow, looked heavy. You have to factor in the trip, the temperature, the time of day. They're not excuses. These are just legit factors. They don't play in a vacuum, ladies and gentlemen. And I think up to a point that kind of exposed the faults of this team even more that day. And moving on to the match against Costa Rica, what adjustments did you see for that game, Urul? Or what do you remember for that match? Or what stood out?
I mean, what stood out? I mean, adjustments I really can't remember is 10 o'clock here.
Yeah.
um, but definitely, I think there was first of all, the team was a little bit more well rested. They were also playing under different weather, but I also think that overall the team came out very motivated. You know, I think they had something to prove. I think they knew that the way the Martinica game went was not necessarily a reflection of who we are as a team, and I think that showed. I think we played a very solid match against Costa Rica, very evenly play match until we physically started to kind of go down towards the last 15-20 minutes of the game. But I do think Menjivar probably had his best game on that game against Costa Rica. Um, so I do think that just overall the team was a little bit more connected and just came out with a different energy. I mean, we kind of seen over and over on Gold Cups that we start a little slow with the on the first match. Um, I don't think, just going back a little bit back to the Martinica game, I don't think that the team thought Martinica was an easy island. I mean, if you look at their results, they've had positive results against Costa Rica, against Panama, just within the last year. So they are obviously not an easy team. And that combined with the way that sometimes we tend to start a little slow and then kind of wake up, um, that played a factor. But I do think that overall the team was highly motivated. They knew it was a game where we had to get a positive result if we wanted to stay alive. And I think that mostly there was a shift in mentality, I would say.
Yeah, I remember we talked shortly after that game, and you mentioned that that was probably one of the best games you've seen from Josh Bettis. And I would say he was the one that kind of stood out in that game for me, just kind of, attempting to carry the team, showing that energy, the tenacity, the competitive drive in a way that we don't tend to see from him. Like you saw his energy level up super high, getting pumped up, getting in the Ticos' faces when they were trying to celebrate tackles, and he wasn't having any of that. He even completed a culebrita macheteada at one point. So you saw that involvement, that chispazo that he kind of had when he broke the scene during his debut in those earlier games 2 years ago. But I'd say one thing that surprised me, and I even caught some flack online, was just not necessarily agreeing with, rotating. And this goes back to the Martinica game of changing the mid versus South Korea and then switching that up a little bit heading into the Gold Cup. It looks like after the South Korea game, it was interesting that Hugo Perez decided to leave Cristian Martinez out of the starting 11, and he basically didn't look back. And so that was something that I just, for my point of view, my liking, I think I would have stuck with Narciso and Cristian Martinez, since, that pairing worked pretty well versus South Korea. You'd think you keep, that the closest to a fixed starting 11 in a short term span of 3 matches. But it didn't look like that was the idea. And instead, Landaverde started both those games. And, in my opinion, he didn't show that same energy that he brought on or that he showed to get called up in the first place. And it just wasn't the box to box player that, we kind of need playing in front of Narciso if we're only going to play with one defensive center mid.
Yeah, I wouldn't, I don't necessarily think that Landaverde had a bad Gold Cup, but it was not his best performance. I think that he is a very good player who has shown what he can do, especially in the last qualifiers. But I don't think this Gold Cup, I think he still doesn't seem as sharp. It seems like he hasn't fully recovered physically from the injury that he had, but he didn't. I would say he was. I kind of thought that he was playing at a 75% of what he can do. I personally like Cristian Martinez a lot. I would like to see more of him. I thought he looked a little bit more aggressive in this Gold Cup than what we used to seeing of him. He's more of a very quiet player in the mid, doesn't really other than sticking to the back line and being that exit route between the center backs. This time I thought he tried to pressure a little bit more, to go up high a little bit more. He even had a few shots. I really like what he brings to the table. I've said that many times here. I think that he has a little bit more physicality, a little bit more athleticism compared to Narciso. Nothing against Narciso. Narciso, when he came in the second game, we saw he brings a lot to the table. But then at the same time, when he has to take the ball away from the other team, he's a small guy, so he tends to struggle more, commit more fouls, put himself into difficult situations where he could easily get a yellow card, even a second yellow card. So I do think that Martinez and Narciso will kind of complement each other a little more, but then Martinez doesn't really have that much of an attacking mentality. But yeah, I think
which is
that
what Landaverde has in theory. So you can get, up to a certain point, some of the rotations. I, on the other hand, kind of would like to see some consistency considering all the rotations that have been occurring throughout the last couple of years. Because I think in general, when it comes down to it, with this rebuild, there's just not enough minutes with certain pairings, and pivotal pairings. Like, how many minutes have Gabalceta and Zabaleta gotten? How many minutes have Narciso and Cristian Martinez gotten to get to know each other? And I think it's just that vertical line that, then you add Brian here to that. And he's only played, what is it, 6 games now total? Um, so if you can get that vertical column going, from the nine to the defensive midfielders to the center backs to your keeper, you just build off of that. Um, and I think they're getting closer, but sometimes just the rotations, just obviously from the outside, not being a coach, just being a fan, I'm just like, but it's nothing personal towards anybody. It's just a question of taste, and that's just my take on it. And to close out the Gold Cup part and the results, let's talk the Panama game. Um, there was a moment during the national anthem where they focused in on Hugo Perez. And for some reason, it just made me think of that third game in the Gold Cup for Albert Roca, where they did a close up of him and he's actually singing the Salvadoran national anthem. And it was the first time he had done it. The whole time he had been the coach, if I'm not mistaken. And there was some, I just took it in. I was like, oh, wow, that's interesting. The match ends. El Salvador gets eliminated. And shortly after, he announces that he was resigning because of all the pressure and all the things against him, whatever. And he was gone. So when I saw that close up third game, El Salvador's on the ropes, I'm like, oh man, hopefully this isn't some like parallel that's going on here. And I remember minute 2, they do another close up of Hugo Perez. I'm like, man, like they're really like trying to show whether he's keeping his composure or not. He's getting a lot of attention in this match. And right as I'm writing that down in my notes, boom, Mario sends that long ball to Brian. He runs between the two center backs. Harold Cummings is like holding on to him like Piqué was in the Champions League shortly a while ago. And he breaks 3 and goal. And I was like, okay, so maybe it's not going to happen. But going back to the game, what were your sensations on this Panama match, especially with a goal like that I don't think we've seen a pelotazo like that ending up in goal in a while.
I can't remember, and I can't think of a player who has that capacity other than maybe Fito in his prime, with that strength. Jokingly, I've said to Andres, if Brian had fallen down, that would have been a red card and we would have had 10 men for the whole match. But of course, the goal is more important, right? But that was straight red. He was the last man. But yeah, I mean, Brian showed what Brian can do. Esa potencia que tiene, velocidad. I mean, it was exciting, and it was one of the fastest games. I mean, one of the fastest goals I've seen from El Salvador. For me, it was a very nice moment because my 2 kids were with me watching the game, and my 7.5-year-old just hugged me and held on to me, and then the little one got scared because he gets scared when we scream. But he was there, so that was a special moment. But overall, focusing on the performance of the team, I always thought, and Panama is what people are saying that Panama is currently the best team in Central America. I think is true. Some people may say, yeah, they made 8 subs. Yes, that's true, but they have a very solid team. I saw them play against Guatemala and San Jose, and with their B/C squad, and they were very solid. They're a very good team. They have a lot of good players. But I've always said, even before this tournament, that I thought that El Salvador, Costa Rica, and Guatemala, that we were in a very we could compete against them. I mean, at this point, I think some people might feel offended if I say that we're in a similar level. I know some people are. I feel that we are very close. At least maybe. I know the history doesn't always play, but it does, because we've been seeing solid Panamanian teams since we took them out of that 2000
2010.
2010 qualifier at the Cuscatlan.
Mazo.
They were the favorites to win that game because they had a pretty solid team. They've been doing a lot of good work to build strong teams. But I still think that we can compete against them, and it can go either way. I think if we play again, and we're going to play Guatemala, in the Nations League in Guatemala, I think that all three Central American teams, El Salvador, Guatemala, Costa Rica, Panama, I know Nicaragua's there too, Honduras. I feel that I don't really feel like the balance will incline more towards Panama. I think that overall they are the best team, but I think that we can compete against all of them. So I wasn't surprised necessarily about the results that we got against them. Again, unfortunately, we lost that first game. So my overall sensations is that the team can compete, after that third match, after that match against Panama and after watching the other two games. I think that we can compete. I do think and agree with you that, there's been, and we talked about this in 2 podcasts ago, there's a change in key positions in the team. There are players who were called in this current Gold Cup who were new playing a Gold Cup. Mengíbar being one of them, the Hill brothers,
Harold
Osorio, who we saw that in the first match that he wasn't quite ready.
Kevin Reyes
for that. Kevin Reyes. So
Romero.
There were a lot of players, and I think I mentioned that
Martinez, like a whole bunch of guys.
Right. But then, Cabalceta and Martinez, they have more miles in their clubs in a fairly competitive league.
But debut in the tournament nonetheless.
Right. Mm-hmm. So I think that there was no more Larin, who has been, I don't know, he played like at least three Gold Cups, I think. Mm-hmm. The Monterrosas, other players, Rivas, who we knew, Seren, we knew that there was a generational change coming. Mm-hmm. And Hugo Perez's coach is focusing on that generational change. He's focusing on having a team that for 2025, when we're in the middle of the qualifiers, a team that is in their 26, 27, not 33, 34 year olds, because they won't be, if we qualify to the Gold Cup, they won't be in their prime anymore. So I think that he's making a lot of bold moves, and some of those moves may not work immediately, like this Gold Cup. I think that any other coach who comes to the country just to coach the senior team without really thinking much about the future and only focusing on the tournament at hand, they would have called some other players, some of the 30-year-olds, the 31-year-olds, the experienced players. So I think that some of the lack of cohesiveness that you talk about, part of it is that generational change in key positions, and some positions that are not necessarily covered yet, such as the left back position, where we ended up seeing Alex Roldan again playing as a left back. And if you notice, yes, it's not his strength necessarily, but he looked better than he looked in the first couple of games that he was used as a left back. So he was kind of getting used to playing in that position with the other defenders, but it's not his natural position. So I think that a big part of what we saw in this Gold Cup was that a combination of generational changes in key spots and a few players who were not in their best. And that can happen. It's like players have moments, teams have moments, and I think it was just a combination of that.
Yeah, I think piggybacking on what you mentioned, the left back is this like black hole situation going on because, you know, he didn't go with Larin. And then after Larin, there's not a natural lefty who can fill that void left. You put Roldan in there, and, you know, is it worth putting it there? What are the opportunity risks of putting him there? Well, number one, you take him off of his natural flank, which is on the right side. In his club, he plays as a right back. Yet he has the characteristics and he's shown that he can play in the mid. He's used to playing in the mid, but by limiting him to the left side, you know, you wish you could see him be a little bit more free, or I feel like it constricts him a little bit more in terms of what he can provide to this team. And that's something that will need to be dealt with, moving on. But who are those options? You have it's Nelson Flores, right?
Mm-hmm.
But he can't leave the country. Also, I think Hugo Perez kind of played it safe in a way by playing Roldan on the left and not giving Nelson as many minutes. But he's also taking into consideration, too, that due to certain immigration issues, he wouldn't be an option off of or outside of U.S. soil. So it makes sense that you're trying to look at other options for a more consistent option there. But then who else is out there? Like I saw you post something about Climaco. What is the situation with him? What does someone like him bring to the table? And is that a short term or more of a long term prospect?
Well, I agree with you. I think that there's a good problem that Hugo Perez and the coaching staff has with Roldan and Tamacas. They're both starters. They can both be starters in that right back position. I think one thing that Roldan has brought is he kind of brings stability to any position that he plays in. Yeah, or at least in the first games that he had with the national team, he seemed solid in every position. He would rarely give the ball away. Every pass was an accurate pass. He defended really well. So if I'm just thinking of a scenario where Roldan plays as a right wing, he's not a winger. He doesn't have although he's solid and he can probably play that position, he doesn't give you what a Jairo Enriquez can give you, what a Mengíbar can give you, or even what Josh can give you, because he's not a player that will take on one-on-ones. That's not his characteristics. But he can play that right side, but more in the position of a right back. So I think there's a conflict there with having two good players, Tamacas and Roldan. But Perez said it after the press conference that he needs to find a left back. He needs a left back, and he also needs a left center back. Now, going to the options, Climaco could potentially at some point be an option. He doesn't have a lot of minutes under his belt in first division. He's played, I would say, maybe he has like 5-6 games in the Costa Rican first division.
Still early then.
Yeah, between friendly matches and official matches. He was loaned out to the second division last year, and he was a starter. So he was, if anything, I would have liked to have seen Climaco in the U22, because that would have been perfect to see what he can bring. It was his age group. He came from being a starter in the second division in Costa Rica, but unfortunately, he was not taken into consideration for the U22. And if you saw, Hugo Perez did put him in the Gold Cup list, the long list. Climaco was there.
Oh wow.
So that
Wow.
tells us that
He's on
he
the
is an
radar.
option that is being looked at. Now in terms of this is just my personal opinion in terms of what I see that Hugo Perez looks for in the left back. I think that Climaco will need a little bit more work with the team. So like even having like microciclos and some friendly matches to see if Climaco is able to adapt to the way Hugo wants a left back to play. I say this because in Costa Rica, in Guapiles, Santos de Guapiles, they tend to play in the with three center backs. So in a three center back lineup, he plays as a left center back. So there's not a whole lot of going back and forth,
Mm.
which I know that Perez likes that a lot. He likes a player who can play with the ball, left back or a winger. I mean, the full back or the of the left wing to know how to play with the ball to go up and down. And sometimes they play with a 4-4-2 in Santos, and then he does play as a left back sometimes, but more he's more of a center back. Now, Hugo mentioned that he would like to have a lefty center back. Now, Climaco could be an interesting player there because he could play both roles depending on how the team is playing. However, I don't think that Climaco has the height for the type of center back that Hugo Perez is looking for. So it's a little tricky. I kind of see Climaco a little bit more of those characteristics of Alfredo Pacheco. Pacheco was not the fastest guy, but at some point he kind of learned to play the left back position. And we saw him, make those runs, and he worked hard on that. I remember seeing Pacheco at 19, and he wasn't where he was at when he was 25, 26. So that's why I say that I think that there is a possibility that Climaco could potentially adapt and play in the style that Hugo Perez wants, but that for that, Hugo will have to see him in microciclos or friendly matches, and he has to play in the first division. Right now is looking promising. When he was loaned out earlier in the year, it was clearly stated to him that it was because of the youngsters rules. They had to bring another young player into the team and give him minutes. So Climaco wasn't going to be getting many minutes. So they were like, we send you to second division, but we'll bring you back in the summer. And so far, it's looking that that's exactly what they've done. He's been participating a lot in the friendly matches, and the season begins on the 23rd, I think, of this month. So we'll see. I think that if he starts playing, he's definitely an option to look at, to continue looking at in microciclos.
Any other left backs that are options or could be options that maybe are a little more closer in terms of minutes or experience?
Playing abroad or
In general?
I don't think so. I mean, I think that if you think of what are the left back options that we know of, Barahona, but Barahona has not gotten into Hugo Perez's squad, and his level has gone down a lot. So other than Barahona, what are the other options? There was I think there was an Alianza player, Jimenez. Yeah, I
But he
think
hasn't been. It doesn't seem like any of them have been on Hugo Perez's radar so far.
yeah. Yeah, I don't think there's a whole lot of options in that position. It's a position we're struggling to find players.
Yeah, one thing hoping and was mentioned too is that Hugo Perez was going to take some time or request some time to look at some players playing abroad, and I'm assuming up to a point that one of them would definitely be someone like Armando Moreno, who the last 2 weeks on my Twitter feed, just some of his goals and assists have been popping up like crazy. So I'm hoping it's looking like he's back from his injury. He's game fit, and I think he's someone that could definitely be called up heading into the Nations League coming in September. Um, I definitely think we could have used someone like Amando in the sense that he has that physicality. He knows how to use his body. We've talked about it before. He's someone that involves his teammates in ways that I think some of the players during Gold Cup weren't able to for various reasons. And it affected that cohesion, the more emphasis on the word cohesion. Um, he's someone that can play with the ball at his feet, incorporate others, but he also has that olfato de gol, and he's been showing it off the last couple of weeks. So it's just interesting seeing how La Selecta was struggling to score, yet here we're seeing videos of Armando scoring for New Mexico. So I think that would be a very positive sign if he gets another shot at the national team and can bring some more cohesiveness to this squad. But to you, Ugo, overall, how would you rate this cup? But were you bummed out more than others? Where would this rank in terms of disappointment, if any, or what was your overall sensation or feeling from this performance?
I think it was more on the disappointment side. Not to the extreme like some others go. I think it was a disappointment just because you always want to go get out of the group stage, and I think as humans we remember the last result and the last Gold Cup. We did better as a team, but also going in, we knew we had a difficult group. It was going to be a difficult group, and historically, most of the times that we qualified to the second round, we've gone through as the best third place, which is no longer available.
Yeah, we didn't
Was
have
no
that
longer available in this
to
Gold
bail
Cup.
us out. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's something that when some others analyze the Gold Cup and the fact that we didn't get out of the group stage, they don't mention that that in a lot of other Gold Cups we've gone through as the best third place or one of the best third place teams, and this time that was not available. So yes, I mean I think that is always a disappointment when you don't win any of the games. Now, am I like at a place where I think that Hugo needs to go? No, not at all. I think that the team created opportunities, and as we know, if we score a goal, the momentum shifts, and sometimes
Like
the
that
players
Brian
play
Heat
their
shot,
role.
like
Yeah,
that
the one
off the crossbar.
right. So you will always say, yeah, that could have changed the game, and that's true, and it didn't happen. So I just feel that as fans, sometimes we are what's the word? What you say cuando ganamos somos los mejores, cuando perdemos somos lo peor.
Extremistas, I don't know.
Extremistas. Yeah,
And
I would say that a
very,
little bit.
very bipolar.
Bipolar,
Yeah.
yes. Let's like I always go back to when we beat Peru at the Adi field
Hmm.
when De Los Cobos was still there.
Yeah.
If you look at the match, do you really think we deserve to win? What, 2-0? Was it
Yeah.
2-0?
2-0, one
We
shot on
didn't
goal.
we didn't deserve to win at all.
Yeah.
It was a horrible match. We could have lost that match 4-0 easily, and we won. But at the end of the day, what do people remember is the result, the score.
Mhm.
So yeah, I mean, I think that I support this process. To me, a process is not 2 years. Some people think that, yeah, he's been there for 2 years and things should have changed now. No, we have a whole broken ecosystem. I know I'm copying Diego Enriquez with that word because he's the one who
Shout
made
out
it
to him.
famous. But we have a broken ecosystem in our soccer, and yet we expect somebody to come in and coach the senior team and change everything in 2 years. That's just not going to happen. Um, and when we evaluate, I still think that even if some disagree, and we have disagreed sometimes with the style that he's trying to play and some of the mistakes that have arise from that style, it's a
Yep.
style. And we finally have a style because the team, even when the team was down against Martinica, we stuck to our style, you know? And yes, against Panama, we saw a little bit, we saw a shift in that because the coaching staff had done their homework and they knew that Panama's center backs were slow, and we started playing those long balls, like the one the Brian Hill one, and that we saw a change there. But I support this process. To me, yes, I would have liked to seen a more successful Gold Cup because it was a good thermometer to see where we were at. But I think it's just for El Salvador at this time. It's an interesting moment because we saw a kind of like an improvement in the last Gold Cup with some experienced players, but then those experienced players are gone. So now you have a new generation, and it's like, how do you keep that level? And we just couldn't keep it there. That doesn't mean we can get there. The other example could be Costa Rica. Many people, I mean, all the media, the Costa Rican media, they're asking for Suarez's head. You know, they just want him out.
Gone.
But what
Yeah.
is Costa Rica going through? A generational change.
Yeah.
I mean, Celso Borges still playing.
And Waston.
I mean, yeah, but I've been hearing about Celso Borges since I was 5. You know, so, I mean that's how I am 25 now. So they're going through a generational change, and they're not the Costa Rica that we used to see in this type of tournaments, but they still carry that. And we also talked about this, the la um esa ese peso, that weight that you carry when you've been to World Cups. You
Yep.
know, that plays a role as well. No matter how new the generation is, they know that their previous generation played a World Cup, and then the previous one played a World Cup. Unlike El Salvador, it's like the generation that played the Gold Cup, I mean the World Cup, they're in their 60s, you know? So I think we're going through that change right now, and hopefully my hope is that that whoever is making decisions and evaluating the work, they take that into account, because it's been a while since I've seen a coach go to El Salvador and actually work day in and day out, and not go on vacation to their country of origin, and then tournament is coming up, then they come back to El Salvador a week before or 2 weeks before to start training. He's actually, doing the work. He's doing the work that other coaches were criticized for not doing. He's there. He moved in, like he said, he moved into El Salvador. He didn't have to do that. He goes to every game, him and his coaching staff. He's asking for the microciclos. He's not trying to get paid for doing nothing. I think he actually cares about this national team and leaving a legacy. And I just hope that it can. I hope that it can continue, and that, of course, that he gets some results to back him up.
Yeah, I think again, once this team has that cohesion, once you start finding those players that can make the right decisions on when to go 1v1 or try and make that extra dribble and get down the line, and then look for the next best option, not just run out of gas or into a wall, I think things will start to look a lot different when you have a more players in the middle that will play off of each other, and then you can start feeding into Brian Hill, or if someone's playing directly under him, like Josh Bettis wasn't during a couple of games. Once you see that freedom of movement, that freedom of getting into the final third, things will look a lot different. And I think he's still trying to tweak that, like you said, with this rebuild, with these younger guys coming in. And the only way they're going to get that experience is by, having performances like they did in this Gold Cup. I mean, to me, it was a bummer in the sense that you wish that they could continue with what was started in 2021 with Hugo Perez, where it seemed like in a short amount of time, this team kind of peaked and got revitalized in a way that things kind of petered out throughout the qualifying cycle, due to various reasons. So I think in general, I understand people's frustration with not making it to the fourth game after a great performance in 2021. But when you look back on other tournaments, to be quite honest, other than 2021, there was no other tournament where El Salvador has gotten more than two wins in the first round, except in 1985, in 1969, and in 1963. Other than that, in the most recent era, in the last 30 years, El Salvador has failed to get more than one win in the group stage. So I think this kind of plays into the pattern that we've seen, where maybe we get a win here and there, or two draws, and then, or if we got a win in the last match day, we qualified as one of the wild cards, but that's not part of the format anymore. So yes, disappointing to lose to Martinica the way that we did, but there was some show of promise with the following two performances, in my opinion. There were some things that I would have done differently, but I'm not the coach. So, I just got to like grumble either on Twitter or in my living room and move on with it. Right. But I'd say, and this is something that we talked about with some listeners on Twitter, where it was like, which elimination hurt the most? So we got some answers from Anthony Lara. Shout out to Anthony for listening into the Corner Blue. He says Gold Cup 2019 when we lost to Honduras 4-0. I remember that one. Obviously, it's in recent memory, where it looked like things were going well for La Selecta. They had 4 points, and then they go down 4-0 to Honduras. That was pretty bad. Let's see who else wrote us. Also heard from Goop. So that it's a pattern where we crash out on the group stage. That's definitely true. Shout out to Josue Munguia for saying that Maya and Brian had a good tournament. And then listener Zito says that the 5-1 in 2013. Do you remember that one, Hugo?
Yes, Mexico
against the US in
against the
Baltimore.
US.
I think that was when Fito scored a penalty, the Panenka, and then we just got clobbered after that. Nothing else happened in that game. That was pretty bad too. Listener Eric Rosales mentions 2017. That was the Lara team that lost 2-0 against the US, and they had one win and one tie in the group stage, and that team was looking pretty good as well. Then El Dia Rambula says that they took a big step backwards with this tournament, that he was super frustrated and he doesn't feel optimistic for qualifying for 2026. I don't blame you. That's the feeling when we get some of these performances, and you wish that we could take that next step in terms of development, or the standing of this team in the area. But I'd say for me, my top would be the 2015 exit, when El Salvador, all they needed was a win or a tie, I think, versus Jamaica, because they had come from a tie with Canada, Costa Rica, and all they needed was more points to get through. and we lost 1-0 versus Jamaica, and that was the end of Albert Roca, and that was like the what could have been. I think that's, to me, that's the biggest what could have been, because that team looked really good those first two matches, and then they tried that third, things didn't work out, and due to all the stuff that was going on and bubbling on the surface and under, I think there was even like issue between Roca and El Primo Beltran Bonilla at the team hotel during that tournament, where things push came to shove over there. But to me, for that's like the one that stands out the most. That if it wouldn't have been for one match, I think things might have looked a little different moving forward. And I know a lot of the former players of that era that we've interviewed have would agree with that statement. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, let's just break down briefly what's on the horizon now that we've gotten the Gold Cup this year out of the way. We've been able to process, but we're going to have to deal with the surprise of the tournament coming up soon. We're playing Guatemala on September 7th for match day 1 of the Nations League. Hugo, what's your sensations with Guate? I know you mentioned you've seen them up close and personal. I saw the friendly versus Guatemala last year at PayPal Park in San Jose. But what are some of your sensations with like the Cinderella of the Gold Cup?
I think Guatemala's doing it's having their moment. Guatemala is currently having the moment that we had in the last Gold Cup with Hugo Perez. I think they have a really good momentum going. I think that they're putting a really good team together. I think that Rubio Rubin has brought a lot to their attacking. Aaron Herrera looks looking very solid in the right back. So obviously the players that they're bringing from abroad are pretty high quality players. Nathaniel Lane, the English born with Guatemalan grandmother, I believe. He's 31, but he still brings a lot of experience. I think he played EPL at some point. I think Guatemala, it's yes, they're if Guatemala loses tomorrow, I think the fans and the team will still be left with a pretty good sensation after this Gold Cup. I mean, they won the first place in the group work with Canada. And some may say, well, Canada doesn't have their A squad. Yeah, they still have a good squad. So lots of props to Guatemala. It's going to be a difficult game. They're going to come with the momentum of the Gold Cup, and they're going to be playing at home, and that stadium is going to be packed because the fans back home are excited about what they've seen in the Gold Cup.
Yeah, I don't think
So
they've played locally in a little bit, if I'm not mistaken. Weren't they in trouble too?
yeah, they were suspended, but they played locally.
Okay.
Or maybe friendlies. I'm not sure actually. I mean, no,
Well,
they were just coming back in the last Gold Cup, so they did play Nations League.
okay.
They played Nations League in the last 2 years.
But they're like
It's
us where they rarely play at home,
yeah,
other than like for qualifiers, it seems.
right, right. So I mean, I do think Guatemala is going to be a difficult team, very difficult team at home. I still think that it's one of those teams that we know each other really well, and the games are going to be tight. They're going to be like those 0-0, 1-0 type of
It'll
thing.
be definitely interesting to see in El Salvador and versus Guatemala that actually matters, ladies and gentlemen, because we know how
Oh
that
yeah,
goes with that
yeah.
matchup. But along the way, not only does El Salvador have to play Guatemala, but they have to face off against Trinidad and Tobago 3 days later on September 10th.
At home,
And
right?
yes. And then a series away and home versus Martinique. So the rematch against Martinique is coming up on October 13 and 17. So maybe that'll be the desquite, of the Gold Cup not working out. By that time, there'll have been more minutes for this team. So maybe it was all meant to be. We'll see how how we react to things in October. So that's what we have ahead of us, ladies and gentlemen. I saw some comments about this Gold Cup and us not making it past the group would directly affect qualifying. Hugo, based off of your research or knowledge, is that true?
Qualifying to the Copa America?
No, qualifying to the World Cup 2026. Does it affect our standing?
Um, I think I can't remember which ranking they're using. It may affect it in the sense that we may not be heads of group. But the reality is that there's going to be 30 teams in the second round of the World Cup qualifier. So just to recap for everyone, the first round of the World Cup qualifiers is going to be played between the 4 lowest ranked teams in CONCACAF. The winners of those series, so it's going to be 4 teams. So the 2 winners are going to join the 28 others that are just waiting there. That includes El Salvador, Guatemala, Panama, everyone. So those 30 teams will be put in 6 groups of 5. And the winners of those groups, actually the first and second place of those 6 groups, will go to the third round. So that's going to be 12 teams, right? Mm-hmm. So those 12 teams will be placed in groups of 4 groups of 3, and then the winners will go directly to the World Cup. Right. And then the runner-ups will play the 3 teams in second place will play the repechaje. So it doesn't. I mean, it might affect the ranking. Maybe we owe that to you guys. I think it's going to be the November ranking, if I'm not mistaken, November of this year. That counts towards however they're going to do that. They haven't announced how they're going to do it. But
CONCACAF style.
Yeah, but it doesn't really affect. It doesn't affect the Copa America, which is going to be based on this coming Nations League.
So, in other words, not all is lost, ladies and gentlemen. I think this was a moment to see what needs fine tuning, and are there many parts to fine tune on this team? But I guess all we can really do is just try and stay either as optimistic or as, I don't know, nonchalant, I guess would be the nice big word to use there, about the results. Changes are looming in terms of the sporting director being named. So a name has been thrown out there, but has not been confirmed officially. So we're still waiting on those confirmations. The normalizadora, we still need to see when they wrap things up and the new Junta Directiva or board for La FESFUT gets elected. So all those are pretty big things off the field that likely will shape, or have a huge impact on the competitions to come. And my hope is that it gets done the sooner the better. And that way focus can just be on the competitions of working on that ecosystem that is so fractured and that just gets exposed at these kinds of tournaments or against these types of rivals that we've had this summer. So that'll be it for La Selecta's action during this summer. We'll be back with more episodes. Hopefully we'll reach out and get answers back from potential guests, but we're going to keep this thing going because we're going to be hitting year 3 as of next month. So that's a pretty big milestone for us. Kind of cool when you stop and think about it. And for all of you that have been with us since then, thank you so much for tuning in. Remember, keep sharing the podcast with your friends, your parents if they want, your tias, your tios. Thank you for all your support, because it does feel great to know that game time, we're bouncing off ideas and and thoughts with all of y'all. So we appreciate that. And yeah, can't look forward more to next episode. Or do you have anything to say before we close out?
Well, just looking forward to this coming week. Hopefully we get some good news, and that there's a sporting director, and we start seeing some positive changes with the organization of the team. Yeah, press conference is on Monday, 10:30 a.m. El Salvador time, I believe.
Nice.
So
Hopefully
yeah, I mean,
we have this out right before that or shortly after.
yeah.
But yeah, I also know for you, you know, you're in the midst of figuring stuff out in terms of your role. So I'm wishing you the best in terms of that. We saw Diego Enriquez pivot to working with the Mexican Federation, and that was made official recently. So props to him for continuing with his work within the industry and the new horizons. And I think that's what we have to look forward to, is just what the new horizons are. And in the meantime, I can keep this jersey that my family brought from El Salvador and not be pissed off, because there was a couple minutes there where I was like, nah, I wasted my money. But no, I'm wearing it with pride today. I'm glad I got it at a discounted price because it's cheaper to buy them there. In any case, yeah, again, much love to all of you. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll catch you guys next time. Have a good one.